A
I trust the
pregnant
settlement
woman
is sufficient,
stands
Miss
in a
Johnson.
hospital lobby.
Please.
She has just
Keep your
seen
money.
her baby's heartbeat
I
on
only
the
came here for him
ultrasound
to see his
screen for the
child.
first time.
This layout
She is
exactly
smiling.
what we discussed.
She is hopeful.
Yes,
Then
and
her
the timeline works
mother-in-law
perfectly.
places a
We should show
suitcase at her
Grace.
feet and says 5 words that will change everything. This family will not be manipulated. Nurses freeze. A young couple nearby goes silent. Her husband stands between them and says nothing. Nothing. Within hours, his mistress will move into her bedroom. Within days, his mother will file for custody of a baby that has not even been born yet. Within weeks, they will try to destroy a $36 billion inheritance she never told them about. They thought they were throwing out a burden. They had no idea they were declaring war on the wealthiest woman in the room. But here is what makes this story different. She never raised her voice. Not once. She never screamed. She never posted their secrets online. She never begged him to come back. She did something far more dangerous. She documented everything, and paper, as they were about to learn, does not forgive. Lesson and value statement. This is a story about the power of silence when the world expects you to scream. It is about a woman who proved that dignity is not weakness, that patience is not surrender, and that the quietest person in the room can be the most powerful. If you have ever been underestimated, dismissed, or pushed aside by someone who thought your silence meant you had nothing to say, this story is for you. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you are watching from right now and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe that quiet strength still matters in a loud world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss what comes next. Now let us begin.
For discharge went silent. Grace, 7 for discharge went silent. Grace, 7 months pregnant, held her ultrasound envelope against her coat as Margaret's voice stayed calm, almost polite. This family will not be manipulated. Andrew stood between them, confused, believing this was about stability, about protecting the Whitmore name. No one in that lobby knew that 12 hours earlier, a $36 billion trust bearing Grace's name had been formally activated. They thought they were removing a burden. They were dismissing the only person who now held the power. If you believe silence is not weakness and that dignity can outlast humiliation, stay with this story. Before we continue, tell me where you are watching from and your local time. I read every comment. And if stories about quiet strength and justice matter to you, consider subscribing. Some battles are not loud, but they are worth witnessing. Grace Sullivan had always believed that silence could be a form of structure. Not surrender, not fear. Structure. At 29, she had built her life around routines that made her feel steady. Morning tea before checking email. A walk around the block before dinner. A small leather notebook kept in the second drawer of her nightstand. She had started that notebook long before she married Andrew Whitmore. At first, it held grocery lists and fragments of thoughts. After the wedding, it began to hold timestamps. Nothing dramatic, just facts. March 3rd, Margaret rearranged the nursery without asking. March 9th, Brooke at the house past 9:40 in the evening. Work discussion. March 12th, Andrew said, "You are overthinking." Grace did not write opinions, only events. The Whitmore house in Greenwich, Connecticut, was the kind of place where your footsteps echo and you feel like you are trespassing in your own marriage. High ceilings, pale marble floors, portraits of Andrew's late father lining the hallway like a silent tribunal. Margaret moved through it like a museum curator guarding the collection. This house runs on discipline, Margaret liked to say. Discipline in her language meant one thing: control. Grace had tried, in the beginning, to interpret it generously. Margaret had lost her husband young. She had raised Andrew alone. Protectiveness could calcify into rigidity, but rigidity over time had turned into surveillance. Margaret questioned Grace's prenatal vitamins. She questioned the brand of crib Grace ordered. She questioned whether Grace should continue working part-time in public health consulting while pregnant. Rest, Margaret would say, her tone coded in civility. A mother's first responsibility is stability. What she meant was stay within reach. Andrew Whitmore, at 33, was not unkind. That was the complexity. He worked long hours at an investment consulting firm in Manhattan. His phone was rarely silent. He had inherited his father's careful speech and his mother's aversion to confrontation. When tension surfaced between the two women in his life, he defaulted to mediation. "Mom just wants what is best," he would tell Grace in their bedroom, voice lowered as if walls were informants. Grace would nod. She had learned early that arguing with Andrew about Margaret did not produce clarity. It produced fatigue. One evening, Grace called her best friend Sophie Brennan while folding baby clothes that Margaret had rearranged for the third time that week. "His mother rearranged the nursery again," Grace said. "I think she is training for a hostile takeover of the baby." Sophie, an emergency room nurse with zero tolerance for nonsense, laughed. "Tell her the baby is not publicly traded yet." Grace almost smiled. Almost. But humor could only absorb so much. Because beneath the daily adjustments and small intrusions, something quieter was happening. Grace was beginning to feel her own version of events being rewritten around her. "You misheard," Andrew would say gently. "She did not mean it that way. You are sensitive lately." Sensitive, the word became the explanation for everything. Every observation Grace made was filtered through that lens until she began to wonder if the lens was her own. That was when the notebook became essential, not as a weapon, as an anchor. There is something Grace understood instinctively that many people learn too late. When someone consistently rewrites your version of events, writing things down is not paranoia. It is self-preservation. If your reality is being questioned, document it, not to attack, to anchor yourself. Grace placed her pen beside the notebook each night and closed the drawer. Structure. That was the word she returned to when everything else felt unsteady. Structure would hold when words could not. And she would need it to hold. Because what entered the Whitmore house next did not arrive with force. It arrived with a smile, a polished blazer, and a laugh that lingered a little too long in hallways. Brooke Kessler entered the rhythm of the Whitmore house gradually. She was introduced as a professional asset, someone assisting Andrew with a complex client portfolio. Early 30s, polished, impeccably dressed, even for casual meetings. She had a way of making Andrew feel important while making Grace feel invisible, and she did both with the same effortless smile. Grace dismissed her discomfort at first. Pregnancy sensitivity. Hormones distorting perception. She refused to become the stereotype of the suspicious wife, but she noticed patterns. Brooke's car parked in the driveway overnight because meetings ran late. 2 wine glasses left in Andrew's home office when Grace had gone to bed early. Calendar notifications on the shared family app, labeled vaguely. Strategy review, offsite. Grace did not confront. She documented. April 2nd, Brooke arrived 6:15 in the evening. Left 11:52 at night. April 5th, Margaret praised Brooke's ambition during dinner. Margaret's approval was not subtle. "She understands legacy," Margaret said once, glancing at Grace as though the word were a test. Legacy. The Whitmores treated it like a currency, stronger than cash. Grace had never been impressed by legacy. She had been raised in Ohio by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse. Stability in her world meant paid bills and quiet evenings, not marble staircases. Still, she had tried to belong. She had moved into the Whitmore house after marriage at Margaret's insistence. It makes sense financially, Andrew had reasoned. We will save before buying our own place. But saving gradually transformed into postponing independence, and postponement slowly became permanent. One evening, Grace came downstairs to find Brooke seated at the kitchen island with Margaret. They were reviewing something on a tablet. Property listings. For what? Grace asked, surprised. Margaret looked up smoothly. Future planning. Brooke smiled. Just exploring options. Investment diversification. Andrew entered moments later, adjusting his cufflinks. He avoided Grace's eyes. Later in their bedroom, Grace asked directly, "Are you looking at properties with her?" "It is work," Andrew said. "Mom thinks it is smart to expand." "And I find out by accident," he sighed. It is not a secret, but it had felt like one. Grace waited until Andrew showered, then opened her notebook. April 22nd, property listings viewed with Brooke plus Margaret present. No prior discussion. The act of writing steadied her breathing. Sophie, hearing about this on the phone the next morning, did not hold back. "So your mother-in-law is house hunting with the other woman while you are building a nursery. That is not a red flag, Grace. That is a red parade." Grace exhaled. "I do not know if she is the other woman." Sophie was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Honey, 2 wine glasses. Overnight car. Property shopping. I have seen car crashes with better communication than your marriage." Grace did not argue, because deep down, beneath the careful documentation and the steady breathing, she felt it too. Something was shifting, not suddenly, not dramatically, the way a tide comes in, inch by inch, until you realize the ground you are standing on is already underwater. Margaret's influence expanded in parallel with Brooke's presence. She began attending prenatal appointments uninvited. The first 2 times, Grace declined politely. The third time, Margaret simply appeared in the car, handbag already placed on the seat. In the examination room, Grace felt the absence of privacy like a draft. The ultrasound technician dimmed the lights, and the faint image of a heartbeat flickered onto the screen. Grace felt something anchor inside her, a quiet certainty, a future independent of the Whitmore surname. Andrew squeezed her hand. For a moment, he looked uncomplicated, grateful, awed. But in the parking lot, Margaret commented on hospital choice, insurance coverage, and whether Grace's stress levels were optimal. Grace wrote it down later that night. April 17th. Margaret suggested my stress could affect the baby. Tone implied blame. The notebook was not an act of war. It was a record against gaslighting. Because slowly, almost imperceptibly, Grace felt her own version of events being rewritten around her. And she refused to let the rewriting go unchallenged, even if the only witness to the truth was a leather notebook in a nightstand drawer. What none of them knew, not Margaret with her iron composure, not Brooke with her calculated proximity, not even Andrew with his uneasy loyalties, was that Grace's life extended beyond the Whitmore house in ways they had never considered worth asking about, and that oversight was about to become the most expensive mistake the Whitmore family had ever made. Grace's great-aunt Victoria Sullivan had been an anomaly in the family, brilliant, reclusive, known within certain financial circles, though rarely discussed at holiday dinners. Victoria had funded scholarships anonymously, built hospitals and communities no one covered on the news, and once told Grace, when Grace was 19 and overwhelmed by tuition debt, something that would echo across a decade, "Security is not noise, it is design." Grace had not fully understood the weight of that sentence then. She was about to. The voicemail arrived while Grace was inside that dim ultrasound room, watching a small heartbeat flicker on the screen. She had not heard it until later that evening, alone, in the garage, seated in the driver's seat of her car with the engine off and the windows up. Miss Sullivan, this is regarding the estate of Victoria Sullivan. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss activation procedures. Activation. The word settled over her like a horizon line, not an ending, an opening. She did not tell Andrew, not because she wanted leverage, because she needed clarity first. In the Whitmore household, information traveled upward to Margaret before it settled anywhere else. Grace was not ready for that storm. Instead, she saved the voicemail. She screenshotted the call log. She noted the date, April 17th, Harrison and Bly, LLP, estate activation. The next morning, when the house was empty, Grace drove into Manhattan. The offices of Harrison and Bly occupied 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking the Hudson River. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and restraint. Daniel Ashford greeted her in person. Early 40s, controlled expression. He did not offer false warmth. In a private conference room, documents were laid out in precise stacks. Victoria Sullivan's signature appeared steady across multiple pages. Daniel began. Your aunt structured her holdings through a layered trust system. Real estate, equities, controlling shares, several multinational funds, total estimated value at current market assessment. He did not pause for effect. $36.4 billion. Grace wrote the number down carefully, as if transcribing a laboratory result. 36.4 billion. Estimated. Activation occurred automatically upon her death, Daniel continued. However, public disclosure is avoidable if we manage this correctly. What does correctly mean? Grace asked. It means limiting information flow. It means anticipating legal vulnerabilities, particularly in marital contexts. Marital contexts. Daniel's eyes rested on her left hand where her wedding band caught the light. Your aunt included a clause safeguarding any assets from claims not directly tied to you or your biological descendants. Grace placed her palm gently over her abdomen. So the trust is insulated, she asked. Yes, provided we maintain procedural discipline. Discipline. The word echoed Margaret's frequent declaration. But here, discipline meant protection. Daniel slid another document forward. Your aunt also left a personal note. He read it aloud. Grace, do not let anyone with a family crest tell you how to spend your money. Grace almost smiled. That sounds like Aunt Victoria. Daniel continued. We also need to discuss potential external pressures once information becomes public. Family disputes often escalate when numbers of this scale are involved. Grace considered the Whitmore dining room table. Margaret at the head, Brooke to the right, Andrew somewhere between loyalty and avoidance. They do not know, Grace said quietly. For now, Daniel replied, verification complete. Confidentiality protocol initiated. As she left the office, the city seemed indifferent to the transfer of billions. Traffic moved. Pedestrians crossed streets. A street vendor argued about change. Grace returned to Greenwich before Andrew did. Margaret was waiting in the foyer. You were out this morning. Yes, at the law firm. Margaret's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. I assume this concerns money. It concerns my aunt's estate. Margaret stepped closer. And what exactly does that entail? Formalities. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Marriage does not mean secrecy, Grace noticed the framing immediately. Secrecy, as if information were communal property. It also does not eliminate autonomy, Grace replied softly. Here is something worth remembering. When you receive significant news, the instinct is to share it immediately with the people closest to you. But Grace understood that sharing information is not the same as sharing power. Before you disclose anything life-changing, ask yourself this: will this person protect this information, or will they use it? That question alone can change your outcome. Margaret's jaw tightened. Andrew entered minutes later, tension rising like static in the air. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Your wife visited a law firm without informing the family," Margaret answered before Grace could speak. Andrew looked at Grace. "I thought you said it was preliminary." "It is." "So why the defensiveness?" Margaret interjected. Grace felt the familiar gravitational pull, conversation shifting from content to tone. "I am not defensive," she said. "I am handling paperwork." That night, laughter again filtered from Andrew's office. Brooke had arrived shortly after dinner. Margaret lingered longer than usual. Grace remained in the nursery, assembling a crib she had ordered without Margaret's approval. Each screw tightened, felt like an assertion. None of them yet understood that the axis of power had already shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but irrevocably. Margaret Whitmore believed that authority was best exercised before it was questioned. The morning after Grace's visit to Harrison and Bly, Margaret began reorganizing the nursery. She did not ask. She did not announce it. Grace returned from a short walk to find the pale oak crib she had assembled pushed 2 feet closer to the window. The rocking chair had been replaced with a high-backed antique from storage. The soft gray curtains Grace had chosen were gone, folded neatly on the dresser, substituted with heavier cream drapes Margaret described as more appropriate. "Sunlight fades fabric," Margaret said when Grace stepped into the doorway. Grace rested her hand against her stomach. "I positioned the crib away from the window for safety." Margaret adjusted a porcelain lamp on the changing table. "We raised Andrew with sunlight in his room. He thrived." Andrew stood in the hall, watching the exchange without entering it. "Mom has experience," he offered lightly. "Maybe we can compromise." Compromise implied 2 equal positions. Grace did not argue. She moved the crib back after Margaret left the room. But Margaret's campaign was escalating beyond nursery furniture. She contacted Grace's obstetrician for scheduling coordination. She requested access to insurance statements. She suggested that Grace sign a post-nuptial amendment. "For everyone's protection," Margaret said. "Protection from what?" Grace asked. "Future misunderstandings." Andrew stood nearby, silent. That silence was louder than accusation. One evening, Grace passed Andrew's office and heard her own name. She stopped just beyond the doorway. Brooke's voice, low but distinct. "She is isolating you. Secrecy is a red flag." Andrew, uncertain. "She is just cautious." Brooke, gently. "She does not trust you. And trust is everything." Grace felt the inversion settle. Caution rebranded as distrust. Autonomy reframed as manipulation. She stepped away before they noticed her presence. Later that night, she asked Andrew a simple question. "Do you believe I am isolating you?" He hesitated. "I think we should be on the same page." "We can be," she answered, "but being on the same page requires both of us reading the same document." He frowned slightly, not fully grasping the metaphor. Grace opened the shared financial app on her phone after he fell asleep. There were charges she had not noticed before. Restaurant bills, labeled as client meetings, ride services billed late at night, a boutique hotel, expense listed under business development. Then she saw it. A charge she almost scrolled past. $2,200 at a jewelry store. Not her birthday. Not their anniversary. Not Christmas. She checked the date. It was the same day as her 28-week ultrasound. The one Andrew missed because of a client emergency. Grace sat in the dark nursery, hand on her belly, and for the first time, her composure cracked. Not with rage, with grief. The quiet, suffocating kind that comes when you realize the person sleeping beside you has been building a parallel life. She did not cry dramatically. She sat there, breathing carefully, one hand on the crib she had assembled alone, and whispered to her unborn daughter, "I will never let anyone make you feel like you are not enough." Sometimes, the deepest pain is not betrayal itself. It is the moment you realize the betrayal was never hidden. It was just ignored by the person who should have been paying attention. Grace closed the financial app. She opened her notebook. May 6th, joint account, $2,200. Jewelry store, date matches missed ultrasound appointment. She did not circle it. She did not underline it. She simply recorded. The following afternoon, Margaret called Grace into the sitting room. "I have been thinking," Margaret began, folding her hands with deliberate elegance. "Pregnancy can make women emotionally reactive. I worry that stress from external distractions could compromise the baby." External distractions. Grace recognized the attempt to redefine her law firm visit as instability. "I am following medical advice," Grace replied. "And whose advice is that?" "My obstetrician." "Andrew is under significant pressure," Margaret continued. "Introducing financial complications into a marriage can be destabilizing." Grace understood then that Margaret's concern was not the baby. It was control. "Any assets related to my aunt are separate," Grace said evenly. Margaret's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. "Separate?" "Yes." The air thickened. Margaret leaned against the counter. "If there is money involved, the Whitmore name is implicated." "Not in this case," Grace replied. "That sounds like a mistake." "It is not." Margaret left the room without finishing her coffee. Grace recorded the exchange. May 7th, Margaret expressed objection to separation of assets, concern centered on Whitmore name, not on my well-being. The notebook's pages were beginning to thicken with evidence of small invasions, none dramatic enough to alarm an outsider. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns, Grace knew, were harder to dismiss than individual incidents. The morning of the prenatal appointment began with cool air, edged with late spring rain. Andrew drove, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting absently on the console between them. He had been quiet all morning, distracted by emails he checked at stoplights. Grace watched the landscape blur past the window and felt the baby shift steadily beneath her palm. 30 weeks. Viable, strong. In the examination room, everything was routine. Heartbeat consistent. Growth on track. Blood pressure stable. "You are doing well," the doctor said. Grace nodded. She was. Whatever chaos circulated beyond her body, inside it there was order. Andrew squeezed her hand when the heartbeat filled the dimmed room. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to sound and light and something uncomplicated. Then his phone vibrated. He stepped into the hallway to answer it. Grace did not need to guess who it was. When they exited the clinic, Margaret was waiting near the hospital entrance. She stood upright despite the drizzle, coat buttoned, umbrella closed at her side. "I thought I would meet you," she said. Andrew looked startled. "Mom, how did you?" "You share your calendar," she replied simply. In the maternity wing lobby, beneath muted lighting and the soft echo of hospital announcements, Margaret stopped walking. Her expression was controlled, rehearsed. "You have been engaging lawyers without consultation. You are separating finances. You are destabilizing this household during a pregnancy." Grace held her ultrasound envelope against her coat. "I am following legal advice." "That is precisely the problem," Margaret answered. She turned to Andrew. "You are too close to see what is happening. Then the line that changed everything. You are no longer welcome in my home until this is clarified." A nurse slowed her pace. The young couple nearby fell completely silent. Grace felt the room tilt. Not physically, socially. Andrew weakly. "Maybe we just need time to cool down." And then, choreographed to the second, Brooke Kessler emerged from the hospital cafe holding 2 cups of coffee. "Oh," she said softly, stopping as if surprised. Is everything okay? Margaret accepted one of the coffees. It will be. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a folded set of keys. These are the spare keys to the guest suite. Brooke will need workspace privacy while assisting you during this transition. Transition. The word was a declaration. Brooke lowered her eyes, performing reluctance. I do not want to intrude. You are not intruding, Margaret replied. You are supporting stability. Grace looked at Andrew one final time. His eyes were on the floor. She turned toward the reception desk. May I have copies of today's visit summary and ultrasound imaging? She asked the nurse calmly. The nurse nodded, glancing between the adults carefully in her bag. Margaret watched the medical documents and placed them carefully in her bag. Margaret watched the movement, interpreting it as defiance. You see, she said to Andrew. Preparation. Grace met her gaze. Yes, preparation, not for confrontation. For inevitability, she drove herself away from St. Matthew's Hospital that afternoon, alone, not to a friend's house. To an extended stay hotel Daniel Ashford's office had recommended for clients requiring privacy. In a beige room that smelled of detergent and distance, she placed the ultrasound photo on the nightstand. She sat on the edge of the bed, and then Grace Sullivan cried. Quietly, not performatively. The kind of crying where your shoulders shake but no sound comes out. She let herself feel it fully. The humiliation, the loneliness, the fear of being 7 months pregnant in a hotel room with a suitcase someone else packed. The crying lasted 4 minutes. She counted afterward because counting was how she kept structure. Then she wiped her face, opened her laptop, and typed an email to Daniel Ashford. Subject: Immediate development. Relocation. In the body, she wrote only facts, removed from marital residence and public setting. Witnesses present, third party moved into home same day. Request guidance on next legal steps. She pressed send. Outside, rain continued to fall. Inside, something had crystallized. Grief does not disqualify you from strategy. Sometimes it is the fuel. The extended stay hotel overlooked a stretch of interstate that never truly slept. Headlights moved in steady ribbons below Grace's window, red and white lines threading through darkness with mechanical certainty. The room was neutral, beige carpet, small kitchenette, a desk bolted to the wall. No portraits of Whitmore ancestors, no marble floors, no audience. Grace slept more deeply that first night than she had in weeks. In the morning, she reviewed Daniel Ashford's reply. We will proceed carefully. First, ensure your physical safety and document all communication. Second, schedule in-person consultation today. Third, do not respond emotionally to outreach. Preserve everything. Preserve everything. Grace appreciated that word. It implied safeguarding, not attacking. She showered, dressed in a simple navy maternity dress, and drove into Manhattan. Harrison and Bly's conference room felt unchanged, quiet, temperature controlled, immune to domestic turbulence. Daniel greeted her with measured composure. I read your email. Public removal with witnesses is significant. Grace placed her notebook on the table. St. Matthew's Hospital, approximately 10:40 in the morning. Nurse present. At least one couple seated nearby. Daniel nodded. Good. Names if possible later. We can request security footage through formal channels. He slid a document toward her. Temporary protective filing draft. This does not accuse. It establishes boundaries. Grace scanned the language. Public expulsion from residence while pregnant. Potential emotional distress. Request for non-interference and formal communication channels. I will sign, she said. Additionally, Daniel continued, if they suspect significant assets, behavior may escalate. They already suspect money. Do they know scale? No. Then it must remain that way. Sophie Brennan visited the hotel that evening carrying homemade soup and righteous anger. She had heard about the hospital incident through the nursing network. News traveled fast through St. Matthews. "I am not saying I want to slash his tires," Sophie said, settling into the desk chair, "but I am saying I know where he parks." Grace almost laughed. "I need a witness, not a felony. I can be both." Sophie studied her friend's face carefully. "You are trending toward legal chess master." "I am trending toward documentation," Grace corrected. Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Do you miss him?" Grace considered the question carefully. "I miss who he could have been. That is not the same." "No, it is not." Grace's phone buzzed. An email from Daniel. Temporary legal separation filing submitted to county clerk. Effective immediately upon service. She read the confirmation twice. It was not a declaration of divorce. It was a boundary. Meanwhile, her phone filled with missed calls from Andrew. 3 voicemails. The first, Grace. "Mom did not mean for it to happen like that." Pause. "She is just worried." Another pause. "Brooke is only there temporarily. Please do not make this bigger than it is." The second, carrying tension. "Mom says if you are involving lawyers, we need to review property titles." The third, softer. "I just want you home." Grace saved all 3. She typed a brief text in response. "I am safe. All communication regarding residence or finances should go through counsel for now." She did not add accusation. She did not add emotion. Minutes later, Margaret called. Grace let it ring. A text followed. "You are overreacting. Return home and we can resolve this privately." Privately meant without record. Grace forwarded the message to Daniel without comment. That night, she began organizing her digital evidence folder. Voicemail transcript from Harrison and Bly. Email confirmation of trust activation. Screenshots of joint account transactions. Notes from her notebook transcribed with dates. Certified bank statement requests pending. She was not building a weapon, she was building a shield. And shields, she knew, only matter when someone is already attacking. The certified bank records arrived 48 hours later. Grace reviewed them with Daniel in the same conference room where she had first heard the number 36.4 billion spoken without emotion. The statements covered 6 months, line by line, date, merchant, amount, authorization. Daniel projected the transactions onto a screen. "Notice the frequency," he said calmly. Restaurant charges clustered around evenings Brooke had been at the house. Ride services corresponding to late departures, hotel expenditures labeled as client development, but processed through the joint marital account. "That alone is not illegal," Daniel clarified, "but it establishes commingling." Then the critical entries. 3 electronic transfers to Kessler Consulting, LLC, Brooks Company. $8,500, $9,200, $9,600, total $26,300. Not catastrophic relative to the trust, but meaningful within a marriage built on shared accounts. Additionally, Daniel continued, property tax payments for the Whitmore residence were shifted recently from a family trust to a personal line of credit under Andrew's name. "Why would that matter?" Grace asked. "Because it suggests financial restructuring, often done in anticipation of asset reallocation." Margaret was repositioning, preparing, even before the hospital lobby, even before the expulsion. Grace filed for a temporary financial restraint order. The court granted it within days. No further asset transfers without joint consent. Then more good news arrived. Sophie confirmed that hospital security had preserved the lobby footage. Nurse Carolyn Webb submitted a written witness statement describing the expulsion in clinical detail. And the voicemail. Margaret's voice recorded on Grace's phone saying there will be consequences was authenticated by Daniel's forensic team. Sophie celebrated by bringing cupcakes to the hotel room. You have got bank records, video evidence, a witness statement, and a threatening voicemail. Your mother-in-law basically built your case for you. Grace allowed herself a cautious smile. It is not over yet. Girl, she handed you the receipts and the rope. For the first time in weeks, Grace felt something close to relief. The ground beneath her seemed solid. The documentation was complete. The restraining orders were in place. The trust was protected. Then Andrew appeared at the hotel. Not angry, remorseful, soft. He brought flowers, her favorite tea. He sat across from her in the lobby and said the words she once would have given anything to hear. I told my mother she was wrong. I told Brooke to leave. Come home, Grace. Please, for a moment, just a moment. Grace saw the man she married, the man who squeezed her hand during ultrasounds, the man she thought she would grow old with. His eyes were tired. His voice was genuine, and the part of her that still loved him wanted desperately to believe. Then her phone buzzed. A forwarded email from Daniel. Andrew's attorney had filed a countermotion. Petition to compel financial disclosure of inheritance, citing marital transparency obligations. Grace looked at Andrew. His face had not changed, still soft, still remorseful. Did you know about this? She asked quietly. He hesitated 1 second too long. My attorney said it was standard procedure. Grace placed the flowers on the table between them. You came here to soften me before the filing arrived. That is not what... Who suggested the flowers, Andrew? You or your mother? He could not answer, because the answer was written on his face. Grace returned to her room alone. She sat on the bed, hands trembling for the first time, not from fear, from the realization that even his apology was a strategy, that every tender word had been approved by committee. She picked up her phone and called Sophie. I almost went back, she whispered. Sophie's voice was fierce. But you did not, and that is the part that matters. There is a lesson here that goes beyond Grace's story. In any difficult situation, exhaustion tries to masquerade as wisdom. It whispers, just let it go. It is not worth it. Grace almost listened, but she recognized the difference between genuine peace and surrender disguised as peace. If you are in a fight that matters, for your child, your safety, your future, exhaustion is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to ask for help. The first disaster came from the obstetrician's office. Routine blood work had flagged elevated stress markers. Grace's doctor called personally, voice careful. Your blood pressure is climbing, Grace. I need you to be careful. We are scheduling additional monitoring. Grace hung up and sat very still. For the first time, the fight was not abstract. It was threatening her daughter's health. The stress she had absorbed, the humiliation she had metabolized, the sleepless nights spent organizing evidence. Her body had been keeping its own record. She placed her hand over her abdomen. I am sorry, she whispered. I am trying. The second disaster arrived the next morning. Margaret had filed for emergency grandparent visitation rights. Preemptively, before the baby was even born. The filing cited maternal instability and flight risk due to undisclosed financial resources. Daniel's voice was tight when he called. She is trying to establish legal claim to your child before birth. I have never seen it this aggressive. Grace stared at the filing documents on her laptop screen. Margaret was no longer fighting about money or pride. She was reaching for the only thing Grace cared about more than dignity. Her daughter. The third disaster came that evening. Sophie called, voice strained. Grace, there is something you need to see. A social media post from a Whitmore family friend. Photographs from a baby shower held at the Whitmore estate. Margaret had organized it. Brooke attended. Grace was not invited. The caption read, Celebrating the next generation of Whitmores. Family is everything. Grace stared at the screen. A baby shower for her child. Throne without her. With the mistress in attendance. Pastel decorations. A cake. Laughter. Women she had once considered extended family toasting a baby they had helped exile. This was the lowest point. Grace sat on the hotel bathroom floor, back against the tub, phone in her lap. She was not crying this time. She was somewhere past tears. She was exhausted and scared for her baby, and for one terrible moment she considered giving up. Just signing whatever they wanted, going back, letting Margaret win. What was the point of fighting people who would steal even a baby shower? She looked up at the ultrasound photo she had taped to the bathroom mirror. Her daughter's profile, tiny nose, curled fist, and something shifted. Not dramatically, quietly. The way a compass needle finds north after spinning. She stood up, washed her face, opened her laptop. She emailed Daniel. 2 sentences, file everything. All of it. I am done preserving their dignity. Daniel's response was immediate. Understood. Within 24 hours, Grace authorized a forensic accountant to perform a full audit of the joint marital accounts and all associated Whitmore financial activity. The results, when they arrived, were devastating. Not for Grace, for the Whitmore family. Brooks LLC had received $26,300 in consulting fees, but filed no corresponding tax returns for services rendered. The $2,200 jewelry charge matched a gold pendant Brooke wore to a Whitmore family dinner. Grace had a photograph from that evening on her phone. She zoomed in, cross-referenced the date, April 14th, the day she had her glucose test alone. Andrew's corporate reimbursement claims contained duplicate billing, expenses charged to both the company and the joint marital account simultaneously. And the property tax restructuring Margaret had initiated was not defensive planning. It was asset concealment, designed to reduce the visible value of the Whitmore estate before any potential divorce proceedings. Grace organized the findings methodically. She did not feel triumphant. She felt aligned. Paper does not raise its voice, she told Daniel during their next meeting. It waits. And when presented at the right moment, it does not argue. It concludes. Daniel studied her. You are handling this remarkably, he observed. Grace closed her folder. I am handling it, she corrected gently. The mediation was scheduled for 9 in the morning in a private conference suite on the 23rd floor of a neutral office tower in Manhattan. No marble floors, no Whitmore portraits. Just a long, polished table, filtered daylight through tinted glass, and a court-appointed mediator named Sandra Klein, who was measured, experienced, and immune to theatrics. Grace arrived with Daniel 10 minutes early. She wore a simple charcoal maternity dress and low heels. No jewelry beyond her wedding band. Her notebook rested inside a slim leather folder. Andrew entered with Margaret and their attorney. Brooke did not attend officially, though she waited in the lobby cafe downstairs. Andrew noticed that. He said nothing. Sandra Klein's voice was calm. This is not a courtroom. This is an opportunity to clarify positions and avoid unnecessary escalation. She turned to Grace first. Miss Sullivan, please state your objective. Grace did not glance at Andrew before answering. Stability during pregnancy, financial clarity, formal boundaries to prevent further interference. Sandra turned to Andrew. Mr. Whitmore. Andrew hesitated. I want my wife home. Grace did not react visibly. Margaret interjected. She left voluntarily. Daniel slid a document forward. Public expulsion, witnessed at St. Matthew's Hospital. Security footage and written statement included. The mediator reviewed the summary. Margaret's jaw tightened. Sandra looked at Andrew. Were you present at that time? Yes, Andrew admitted quietly. And did you object to your wife being asked to leave? Silence filled the room. I did not think it would escalate, he said finally. Daniel continued. We are not alleging abuse. We are establishing pattern, He presented the certified bank statements. Transfers to Kessler Consulting, LLC highlighted. Forensic accounting discrepancies flagged. Sandra examined each document. Then the voicemail recording played through the conference room speakers. Margaret's voice filled the space. If you continue this legal theater, there will be consequences. The room contracted. Sandra addressed Margaret directly. Mrs. Whitmore, you are not a party to this marriage. Why were you directly threatening the petitioner? Margaret's composure held by threads. I was expressing concern for my son. Concern does not require consequences, Sandra replied evenly. Then Daniel placed one more exhibit on the table. The baby shower photographs, social media posts, documenting a celebration for Grace's unborn child, organized by the mother-in-law, attended by the woman who moved into Grace's home. Grace not invited. Sandra studied the images. She turned to Andrew. Were you aware of this event? Andrew's voice was barely audible. I did not know it was public, but you attended. Silence. Yes. The mediator folded her hands. The mediation concluded with temporary orders upheld. Financial restraint reinforced. Communication through counsel. Grandparent visitation filing rejected pending further review. Grace felt relief settle into her chest like something heavy, finally resting on solid ground. But the relief lasted exactly 72 hours. Daniel called on a Thursday evening. His voice was different, careful. Grace, there has been a development with the trust. What kind of development? Victoria's former business partner has filed a challenge to the trust's validity. He claims Victoria was mentally incapacitated when she signed the amendment naming you as beneficiary. Grace felt the floor drop. Is it legitimate? It is coordinated, and the timing suggests someone in the Whitmore circle may have connected him to the opportunity. Grace closed her eyes. Even after mediation, even after the court orders, Margaret had found another angle. Daniel continued. The challenger's name is Richard Payne, former associate of your aunt, removed from her board 15 years ago for financial irregularities. How did he know about the trust activation? That information could only have come from someone who knew you were named beneficiary. The Whitmore attorney made informal inquiries last week. Grace felt something she had not permitted herself in this entire ordeal. Anger, not loud, not chaotic, cold. Then, we do not just defend, she said. We file a counterclaim for tortious interference with inheritance, and we subpoena Margaret Whitmore's phone records. Daniel studied her. Are you sure? She tried to take my home. She tried to take my child. Now she is trying to take my aunt's legacy. Yes, I am sure. The phone records revealed what Grace suspected. Margaret contacted Richard Payne 3 days after mediation. 2 calls totaling 47 minutes. The connection was undeniable, but Grace needed more. Sophie, resourceful as always, flagged something the forensic accountant had missed. An invoice from Kessler Consulting to Richard Payne's legal team. $15,000 for strategic consulting. Brooke was not just the mistress, she was the fixer. Grace sat with this information for one full evening. She did not gloat, she did not celebrate. She called Sophie. I have everything, she said quietly. So what now? Now I let paper do what shouting never could. The family court hearing was held on a Tuesday morning. Judge Patricia Hartwell presided. Late 50s, measured eyes, a reputation for precision, and zero tolerance for theatrics. Grace arrived with Daniel precisely on time. 7 months and 3 weeks pregnant. Composed, her posture upright, movements deliberate but unhurried. Andrew sat at the opposite table beside his attorney. Margaret occupied a seat behind him, posture rigid. Brooke was absent entirely. Her absence said everything her presence once had. Judge Hartwell reviewed the summary briefs in silence before speaking. This is a hearing on temporary orders related to marital separation, financial restraint, and protective boundaries during pregnancy. Daniel rose first. Your Honor, we are not seeking punitive action. We are requesting continued financial restraint, recognition of documented interference, and enforcement of communication boundaries, given prior intimidation and coordinated legal harassment. He presented the exhibits systematically, certified bank statements with unauthorized transfers, forensic accounting linking Brooke Kessler's LLC to the trust challenge funding, phone records showing Margaret's coordination with Richard Payne, CCTV footage from the hospital, written witness statement from Nurse Carolyn Webb, voicemail recording, baby shower documentation, medical records showing stress-induced blood pressure elevation. Each document was numbered, time-stamped, unambiguous. As the hospital security footage displayed on the courtroom screen, Andrew stared at the still frame. Grace, standing with her ultrasound envelope clutched to her coat, Margaret's posture angled forward, his own expression caught in confusion. He had never seen the moment from that distance. From the outside, it looked exactly like what it was. Andrew's attorney attempted to manage the damage. Your Honor, my client was unaware of the trust challenge coordination. Judge Hartwell, was your client also unaware of $26,300 in unexplained transfers to his associate's company? Silence. The judge turned to Margaret. Mrs. Whitmore, you coordinated a legal challenge to a protected trust through a third party. You funded that challenge using your son's marital assets through an intermediary. You filed preemptive custody claims against an unborn child. You publicly expelled a pregnant woman from her residence with witnesses present. And you left a recorded voicemail threatening consequences. Margaret rose with what remained of her dignity. I was protecting my family. Judge Hartwell's response was quiet and devastating. Your family, Mrs. Whitmore, now includes a granddaughter you may not see unsupervised for quite some time. Then the moment the entire story had been building toward. Andrew's attorney, attempting to argue for equitable distribution, referenced the inheritance in question. Daniel stood. Your Honor, for the record, the Victoria Sullivan Living Trust, of which my client is sole beneficiary, holds assets currently valued at approximately $36.8 billion. The courtroom went still, Andrew's face drained of color. Not from greed, from recognition, the full weight of what he had lost. Not money, something that money could never replace. Margaret gripped the armrest. Her lips parted. No sound came out. For the first time in this entire story, Margaret Whitmore had nothing to say. The woman who had always had a response, always had a strategy, always had the last word, sat in silence as the number settled over the courtroom like a verdict of its own. Brooke Kessler was not present to hear it, but the information would reach her soon enough. And when it did, the woman who had calculated every move, who had positioned herself as indispensable, would finally understand that she was never competing with Grace Sullivan. She was never even in the same arena. Judge Hartwell did not react to the number. She made a note and continued. The trust is insulated by design and is not subject to marital claims. The counterclaim for tortious interference is accepted for further proceedings, final orders, full financial restraint permanent pending divorce proceedings. Margaret Whitmore prohibited from direct contact with Grace Sullivan. Grandparent visitation reduced to supervised bi-monthly visits. Kessler Consulting, LLC, referred for tax fraud investigation. Andrew Whitmore granted supervised co-parenting access contingent on full cooperation. Grace stood when it was over. She did not look at Margaret. She did not look at the empty chair where Brooke should have been. She looked at Andrew, just once, and what passed between them was not hatred. It was the quiet recognition of something that could not be repaired. In the hallway, Andrew walked beside her. "I did not fight you," he said quietly. Grace paused near the elevator. "I noticed. Is that good?" "It is accurate." Margaret approached from behind. Her voice was low. "This is not over." Grace met her gaze. "It is structured." Daniel stepped between them gently. "Further direct engagement will be recorded." Margaret stepped back. For the first time, Fahrenheim retreat was not strategic. It was forced. In the weeks that followed, the consequences arrived without drama. Kessler Consulting, LLC was investigated and dissolved. Tax irregularities resulted in professional sanctions for Brooke. Her reputation in Manhattan consulting circles collapsed quietly. She was last seen at a coffee shop in Connecticut, alone, scrolling job listings on her phone. Margaret's Whitmore estate became a burden without Andrew's income flowing through the household. Legal fees mounted. She did not lose the house. She lost something worse. Relevance. Andrew stopped returning her calls weekly, then monthly. She sat in her study, surrounded by portraits of Whitmore legacy, and discovered that legacy without connection is just expensive furniture and empty rooms. Andrew moved into a modest apartment. He did not contest the divorce. During one of his supervised visits, he held his daughter Clara for the first time and broke down completely, not because of the money, because of the crib. Grace had positioned it in the new nursery exactly as she had in the Whitmore house, same angle, same distance from the window. He realized she had been building Clara's world all along, and he had been dismantling it. "I am sorry," he said. Grace nodded. "I know." She did not say, "I forgive you." She did not say she did not. She simply let the statement exist between them. Because some things do not require response. They require witness. Grace purchased a townhouse in Manhattan through the trust's holding structure. Unremarkable from the outside. No marble, no portraits. Inside, the nursery was arranged exactly as she had originally envisioned. Light gray curtains, oak crib positioned safely away from the window. A rocking chair she chose without consultation. She established the Victoria Sullivan Maternal Health Initiative, funding clinics in underserved communities. No press conference, no branding campaign, just grants issued quietly. The kind of impact Victoria would have approved of. Clara's first birthday. Small gathering. Sophie arrived with a cake and immediately made Clara laugh by pretending to eat her toy giraffe. Andrew attended. He removed his shoes at the door. He listened more than he spoke. Margaret was invited for a limited window. She arrived punctually carrying a simple silver bracelet engraved with Clara's initials. No speech, no attempt to reclaim authority. She stood slightly apart, observing. Grace did not humiliate her. She did not reference court orders. She did not mention the voicemail. The past existed in record, not in conversation. That evening, after guests left, Andrew lingered near the doorway. "You did not have to let her come," he said softly. Grace adjusted Clara against her shoulder. "Clara deserves to know her grandmother." "On safe terms. And you? What do you deserve?" Grace looked around the townhouse. The calm lighting, the steady rhythm of a life constructed deliberately, books on shelves she had chosen, photographs she had taken, a home that answered to no one. "I already have it," she said. Later that night, after Clara slept and the house was quiet, Grace opened her notebook for the final time. She wrote, "Clara, 1 year. Financial structure secure. Boundaries respected. No retaliation required." She paused, then added 2 more words. "Silence preserved dignity." She closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer. Not hidden, not displayed, stored. They placed a suitcase at her feet in a hospital lobby. They believed they were removing a burden. They believed money would make her arrogant. They believed humiliation would silence her. Instead, she documented. Instead, she structured. Instead, she walked away with clarity intact. No raised voice, no public revenge, just alignment. And that, more than $36 billion, was what endured. Some victories are loud. They come with applause and headlines and visible defeat on the other side. But the most enduring victories are quiet. Grace never shouted. She never exposed private failures to satisfy public curiosity. She did not use wealth as a weapon or humiliation as currency. She chose documentation over drama, structure over spectacle, boundaries over revenge. When someone underestimates you, the instinct is to prove them wrong immediately, loudly, visibly. But real strength does not rush to perform. It prepares, it observes, it records. It waits until truth can stand on its own without emotion having to carry it. If there is one thing this story teaches, it is this. Protect your peace the way you would protect your child. Fiercely, quietly, and without apology. You do not owe anyone your reaction. You owe yourself your stability. If this story moved you, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. What part stayed with you the most? Have you ever experienced a moment where quiet strength changed everything? Share your reflections in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe that dignity, structure, and emotional resilience still matter in a noisy world, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more stories here about quiet power, the kind that does not shout, but endures. This story was created for entertainment and emotional reflection. All characters and events are fictional. While inspired by real relationship dynamics, no real individuals are depicted. The narrative was researched, structured, and manually edited to deliver meaningful content. Thank you for watching. Closing disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling with real emotional value and life lessons. All characters and events are entirely fictional. While inspired by real relationship dynamics, no real individuals are depicted. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this community.